Hello everyone, welcome to the Seattle North End Clinic of the 4th Division of the Pacific Northwest region of the National Model Railroad Association. We're going to have a panel tonight on the different options for car forwarding. I'm going to start off talking about something called car cards and waybills. Joe Green is going to talk about his very interesting approach of conductor-generated switch lists using car cards and waybills as a starting point. Russ is going to talk about computer-generated switch lists, and Todd is just going to give some of his thoughts on how to run his new layout. Now, after Todd's finished, we'll have a group discussion. I've already asked Larry Sloan if he would make some comments, and also maybe Hack, who's joined us from California. So we should have a lively group discussion after we're done. The bottom line here is just to say that operating is as much fun as the rest of model railroading, rail fanning, model building, and collecting. And they provide a sense of purpose to all the model building and rail fanning and collecting, because you can build models of cars and locomotives and track all day long, but it's when you move trains on them and simulate the customer demand for shipments that you really start to have railroad operations. And I think that's why a lot of us spend time on this, because we think, well, what's the purpose of all these models if we don't have some trains happening? So in the system of car cards and waybills, this yellow card is a car card. You can see it has the reporting marks of the car, and this particular car is the one on the right-hand side of this cut. You can't really see it too well, but there are 6 cards here corresponding to those 6 cars, and they each have a destination. In this case, the Skykomish area gravel quarry, and of course it's empty, which you can see it's empty. I also use these cards, since we're handling the cards, I also have locomotive cards where I can put the function codes so people will know how to ring the bell and turn on the rotating beacon and things like that. So there are locomotive cards, and many people also will have caboose cards. So you can put together a train on your layout and then have a series of cards that correspond to the locomotive, the cars, and the caboose. This is some more examples. I mean, each track on the layout gets a box for these car cards, and that can make a bit of a mess on front of the layout, but there are a couple of examples of this here. This is in the Interbay Yard on my layout, where each yard track has got a bunch of car cards in it, which correspond to the cars that are stuck on here. And in order for this to work, the yardmaster has to keep these cards in the same order as they are on the track, and it's very easy to establish multiple blocks on the same track. So for example, here on the left, we have a block of cars going southbound, and we have another block going northbound. They're on the same track, but as the yardmaster puts together a northbound train, you can see you can pull these cars and these cars from track 1 and 2 and put them into a train and then get going. It's also useful to have instructions for each train. And I do this with a Word document, and I just print these out and cut them up with a paper cutter. This is just an example of 2 train instruction cards, which essentially tell the operator what to do. And I don't want to take time right now getting into any of this in detail, just to say that it can have the expected time of departure can be there, the train number, and the directions for how to run the train, and what to do with cars. For example, this says the maximum number of cars for this train would be 25 cars. So instructions for a train, I wanted to mention that because it's a different type of card, and when we get to Russ's part, he'll talk about a different way of making train instructions. There are a lot of ways to make cards. You can simply write them with a pen and paper. I've really been enjoying a computer program called Waybills, made by Shinware, which has been around for quite a while. And the guy who wrote this program incorporated the OPSIG shipper database into it. So I can just go right into the industries and select from companies all over the country that I want to ship something to without having to do any additional research, because over time people have contributed their factories to the OPSIG website and a special interest group for operations, and that's an incredible resource. The thing I wanted to show you here about the waybills that go in the car cards is that in this case they're called 4-cycle waybills, so they get flipped around both front and back and top to bottom, So let's just pick on this car for a minute. It's starting with the destination of the Ballard branch in Seattle to Northwest Steel and Pipe, and it's got pipe in it, and it's coming from Utah. Then when that's loaded, the next operating session, it says it would go to the empty car track in Seattle, obviously from where it was unloaded, and it would be empty. The next operating session, it would go to Weyerhaeuser's Mill B in Everett, and again be empty because they needed it for something. And then, of course, the fourth operating session, when we flipped this waybill, it would be shipped to Pomona, California on the Southern Pacific, and it would be a load of lumber. And you can see I have a yellow zone here telling the operator to weigh it at the track scale and put in the weight on that dotted line. So you can see that the movement of a car has several cycles. And of course, the challenge of maintaining this kind of a system is that after every operating session, you need to flip the waybills for each car in order to proceed with the next session. Now, I should mention, in many cases, it takes more than one operating session to complete one waybill cycle. And I remember seeing an article in the Gazette one time, Craig Symington, who's a famous HON3 modeler, he was saying that some of the cars on his layout, they take 6 operating sessions before they get to their final destination because of the various trains that the cars get put into in order to get to their final destination for that one cycle. If you didn't follow what I just said, don't worry about it. I got carried away there. It's also useful to have a color scheme for destinations with car cards, and this purple corresponds to the Skykomish area on my layout, and I've adopted the color system of south is warm and north is cold, so the cold colors are in the north zone of the layout and the warm colors are in the southern zone. It's handy for me because I'm modeling the Seattle area, and the Milwaukee is obviously going to be orange, and the UP is obviously going to be yellow, and of course they're both warm colors, and they both correspond to southward movements, because even though the Milwaukee was going east, it did that from Tacoma. It's also useful to operators to know where they're supposed to drop off the car, and SPINS is the prototype employee handbook on what tracks are where. So I made up diagrams that follow the SPINS kind of layout, and that lists for each zone of the railroad, it lists the different shippers that you can access. And what's important on here is to note that there are 3 different companies that are all on track 1353. And so the way this works is this is zone 13, that's the 1-3, and then 53 is track 1353, which is down here. And this track here has all 3 of those industries on it. This is an aid to the operators of exactly where they're supposed to spot a car. And if I just go back for a second, you can see there's a SPINS number on this waybill saying that it goes to zone 54, track 88, and spot number 1. So that this is a numeric way to assist the operator in addition to the purple that tells them to go there. I also have a simplified diagram of the track schematic showing which colors correspond to which locations. And you might remember we were looking at a car going to the Ballard branch, and that was a gray waybill. And this shows that's zone 13. Now, just for a couple of other examples, and then we'll go to some of the other presenters. Bill Sorensen recently used Excel to generate a whole bunch of waybills for his layout, and he's also using a color scheme on these waybills. He did this whole thing in Excel, and he's happy to share the file with anybody who wants to play with it. He did something I really love with the car cards, which is to put the logo for the railroad right on the car card, which means you can see the Northern Pacific logo here and then look up and see the Northern Pacific car that it corresponds to. And then there's the simple version, which I did for many years myself, which is you can simply take the micromark waybills and handwrite the destination on them. And this is a picture from Walt Apple's layout, which was partly built by Lance Mindheim up in Linwood. Beautiful layout. And he just, hand wrote some waybills and hand wrote the car cards. So he was able to get this whole operating scheme up without any computer work whatever. And, this keeps a yardmaster busy trying to figure out what's going on these 5 tracks. And then there are 3 or 4 locals that come out in each direction, and it's quite a fun operation. So I just want to say there are a variety of ways of making. You don't have to get fancy making car cards and waybills. And this is a picture of Todd handling the jet job on my layout. And I just wanted to give a picture of what it feels like to deal with car cards and waybills. Here Todd has fanned out the waybills that correspond to this train. And you can see there's a locomotive card here for the locomotive. And then the box cars and the skybox cars are all lined up here with a caboose card at the end. And the purple means that most of these cars in his train are going east, but the blue car is going north. So at some point when they get, this goes to the yardmaster in Everett, they'll have to pull out this one car, which I think is the second skybox, and then put that in a northbound train, and all the rest of these can go into a westbound train. So I think with that, I'm done, and we can move on to Joe Green's approach.
So I'm Joe Green. I have a layout here in Squim. It's for those of you who don't know, it is a switching layout based on the Chesapeake and Ohio in 1974. And when I started building it, I had some fair amount of experience in operations out of the Bay Area, mostly with the micromark type car cards and waybills that Burr was showing. And one thing I had read was that prototype operators, another prototype, you didn't have a stack of waybills in your hand when you were out switching in a yard or a customer. The waybills stayed in the office or in the caboose. So when I started, that was what I wanted. I wanted to not do that, as I should say, not have people using the waybills in their hands and to use switch lists because I had read that that's what real operators did. I have since then learned more things than switch lists and others, and I'll try to tell you a little bit how I thought this through and what I'm using now. So the first thing I would say is a question I think that you want to ask yourself is, do you want to be prototypical? And I mean, if your answer is no, that's fine, and you can probably do things a lot simpler than what I'm going to show. But if you do want to be prototypical, which I enjoy trying to get to that angle, one thing to ask yourself is your time frame and your railroad. So, like I said, I'm 1974 in the Chesapeake and Ohio, and the way that things would have worked then would be very different than if it was today on CSX in the same era. I mean, it would be a completely different scheme that people would use. So, what time frame you have and what railroad even can affect that. As I got more involved, I found out that there were all kinds of people involved in how do you learn the destination of a car, from customers, agents, yard masters and yard clerks, the train crews, and others. And so as the more I learned about those roles, the more I started to evolve the system that I had to try to incorporate at least some of the different roles that could be involved. Which leads to a second question: how much time do you want to invest in this? Right? You can spend a lot of time setting up your system, or if you don't want to, you can spend less. And for each operating session, how much time it takes to set it up can vary based on what car forwarding system you have. I enjoy this stuff. So the fact that it takes more time is okay with me. In fact, to me, my operating session starts prior to the operating session when I am playing the roles of an agent or a customer or a yard clerk and setting up the paperwork for the session. But other people wouldn't enjoy that, and in which case you don't want to go down some of these paths. You want to make your life simpler. Your style of operations can definitely impact what you're doing. I have a switching layout, so spending the time to bring in the prototype into those operations, how we do that makes more sense perhaps. If you are running more through trains, for instance, you might want to use a different system. And the final thing I suggest for people to think about is your operators. I've had operators who are just starting out. I've had operators who are extremely experienced and in between. And so I want to have a system that I can vary based on the experience of people. Another thing you might think about is if you're sharing operators, for instance, with another layout, having a common scheme might be helpful for people to learn, right? So they aren't having to relearn a scheme for each different railroad. So those are some things to think about. At the beginning, I was using the micro cards and waybills, and I was resisting the urge to do my own until I learned about this, the empty car bill. When I realized that empty cars, many of them don't actually go on a waybill when they're going home. They go on a completely different type of card, as it were. I'll come back to that in a second. Because of that, I finally bit the bullet and said, I'm going to do my own waybills on the left side, my empty car bills on the right side. Both of these are for an empty car. The waybill is for a covered hopper. The covered hopper had kaolin in it. We are returning it free back through the route that it came. A covered hopper, a tank car, things like that would actually go back on a waybill, where a general purpose boxcar, this is B&O boxcar, would not go home on a waybill. It would go home, in this case, routing it back to Chicago. We're saying we, this Chesapeake and Ohio, received this car from the B&O in Chicago, so we were sending it back that way to send back to them. And it turns out, actually, the more I got into this, routing cards to where they're supposed to go when they're loaded is much easier than sending them home. You get all kinds of different things happening when you go homeward bound. So for instance, this empty boxcar, we might confiscate it and reload it before we send it. So we might not actually use this empty car bill. We might confiscate it and send it somewhere else. On the waybill over here, some of you may be looking at this and saying, but that doesn't look like a waybill to me, Joe, because it doesn't have the two columns. What I have done is just the left side of the waybill, or I'm using that as my prototype. And the reason I'm doing that is twofold. One is because on the prototype, conductors always would fold the waybills in half because they only needed what was on the left side of the waybill. These two are about the size that they would be. They would be about 4 by 11 is what these forms would be once this one was folded. And this one was actually the empty car bill was 4 by 11, so it would fit in the same stack. So one thing is to be prototypical, but the second thing, and what's really more important to me, is to make it easier for the people to use it as operators. Because when you have both sides of the waybill, you're presenting a lot of data that people don't need. And so I'm trying to put the side that people do need. And because I'm doing it only one side, I can use a larger print that you can actually read better than some others. So hopefully that makes this easier for my crew to use. And like Burr was showing, I use a bit of a color code here. Red would tell the crew that this car is going east off the layout. I could ask them to read the route. That says it's on the C&O, that's us. We're going to send it to Lynchburg, Virginia. Very few operators, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, know where Lynchburg, Virginia is and how it relates to Mill Gap, Virginia, or Mountain Grove, Virginia. Also, there's just some of this is eye candy. For instance, this is an assigned car, which means it can't be confiscated. It has to go back to the same railroad and same shipper, in this case, that used it in the first place. So hopefully that makes a little sense, that these are the two things that are now, if you would, the backbone of what I'm using. I have switch lists, as Burr described. This is pretty close to what a switch list looked like on the chassis system at that time, including the advice, be alert, don't get hurt. In this case, this switch list is in my Thomas yard, telling the crew in my next operating session, it's a switch list to take track 4, all the cars on track 4. Some of them will move 1 to track 5, track 2, track 8. These cars stay on 4. So this is a switch list that can be used in the yard. On the right side here is an example of what a station agent might provide to a crew to use. So in my town of Mill Gap, the crew that's working this town, this is the form that they will receive. Now, station agent ones would have been almost all typed. So the handwriting here it just makes my life easier to do it that way. And honestly, some of the ones I've seen are not nearly the structure. They're almost like just free-form paragraphs. That would be, frankly, if it was me, it'd be rather hard to understand what they were telling me to do. There was one that I saw that had a bit more structure like this that I've set up for the crews that work in Mill Gap. So to putting this all together then, on my railroad, I have 4 crews. 2 of my crews, they work from switch lists that the yard clerk writes for them. So those two crews, they don't have to look at the way. In fact, they will never see the waybills. They'll never see those empty car bills. All they will see is a switch list by the yard clerk, which is a role that I play during the session. I've had very good luck with this. I think most people have found this to be at least as easy, if not easier, than having a pack of car cards or waybills in their hand. My other two crews will be having work with other ways of getting their information. Both of those crews will work in a yard that does not have a yard clerk and does not have a yard master. And so those conductors will have to write their own switch lists using, again, the waybills that I showed in a couple slides back. I have some instructions that help people to know what their switch list needs to do, but they write the switch list themselves. One crew, the station agent will provide them the switching instructions when they get to a town to do their switching. And the other crew will actually work from a customer. The customer will provide them switching instructions. And that one I didn't give an example of because that's completely out of my own imagination since it's from a customer. So my intent here is to, in the 4 different crews, to give them different experiences of how a real prototype crew might get their instructions of what they should do in their switching. If they're working in a yard that has a clerk or a yard master, those switching instructions may be provided to them on a switch list. In other situations, they might have to write their switch list, or a station agent might provide them instructions, something that might look more like this, a typewritten document. And then finally, there are times where just a customer is going to tell you what to do. And I've tried to create that scenario as well. So with that, I hope that made some sense, and I'll turn it back over to you, Burr.
Thanks a lot, Joe. That was excellent. Now, Russ is going to tell us about using a computer to generate all this material.
Thank you, Burr. My layout is a pretty simple little layout. It's a logging line, totally freelance, but built on Northwest principles. And a lot of the towns are named from Northwest locations. So just a quick orientation. This is the staging yard at Morton. Trains come in from the outside world on the Denver Rio Grande and come into Coal Creek. And here the trains are, that train is left and that road crew goes off. They turn the engine, service it, and put it on the outbound track ready to return to Morton. The train will start here. We're going to run one train up to Tiger Mountain, which is at the end of the line. It goes around past the mill. This is the Coal Creek Lumber Company, past Lake Johnston. And here is an ice house. They cut ice in the winter and store it for the summer. Comes to the midpoint in the layout at a town called Bunkers. Bunkers is basically dealing with mines. And so there's a switchback here that goes up a 4.5% grade and switches back to this area right here, Ellerby Mines. There's also another set of bunkers here at Hamilton. There's a Y here, and one leg of the Y takes you into a small town called Mineral. And here there is another mine, Consolidated Mines, with big bunkers and several other shippers and distributors to the area. An oil dealer, Stanley Oil, Hampton Supply, which handles lumber and other materials. Here's the depot, and then Glenoma Hardware gets items that are used in the mine as well as in the nearby communities. The other leg of the Y goes along the stairway up the grade, about a 4% grade, up to Tiger Mountain. There's a Y here, and then it comes into town. This is where log loads are assembled from the cutting areas, and trains are made up, and log turn will take loads of logs down to the sawmill here at the early part of the layout. There are a couple of other places here to switch. There's a stores building, a loading dock, car repair shed, and some other facilities. So this is the theory of my layout. Once you get the idea of the layout, in this program, which I use, is called RR Ops, generated by a friend of mine. And he wrote this program, has perfected it over the last many years, and it's incredibly easy to use. So the first thing you want to do with your layout is after you've got it all laid out and schemed as to how you want to organize it and track work and all that's done, you have all of your industries. And so this is the pictogram, which describes the main line from one end, Morton, up to Tiger Mountain. And at each of these locations, there is a series of industries or spots for cars as you proceed up the line. So I'm going to share with you now how the program is designed to operate. Up along the top here is a series of things that I need to know. One, the first thing is grist, which lists all the cars on my layout. These are the cars, the reporting number, and this tells me right there where the cars are currently located. It also tells me whether they're loaded, empty, or idle. The other thing of grist is the locomotives on my layout that are currently active, and this tells me where they are situated at the beginning of the session. It tells me what they are and what their tonnage rating and so on is. Well, the other thing in grist, I can establish regular trains. And these are trains that I describe what the route they take and where they begin and where they end and what they generally are doing. For instance, this train number 30 is the log turn, and obviously it's going to bring loads of logs down to the mill. The second part of that turn is train number 31, which will bring the empties back up to the Tiger Mountain. So I'm going to share with you a single train, and this is what the switch list looks like. This tells me what I'm going to do with this train. Here's my locomotive. It's a Shea number 6. The caboose that's going with it is a Coal Creek Lumber Company number 5. It's going to leave from Coal Creek and proceed all the way up to Tiger Mountain. So this is the train that the computer has built for me. At random, it picks cars in from certain locations based on waybills that I've generated. I didn't show you that in grist, but in grist, you generate bills of lading, which describe various industries and what kinds of cars they need to operate with. So the computer system is designed to assign to any one of those locations the appropriate car, and if it's empty or loaded, depending on how it was left in the program at the end of the last session. So in this case, I'm going to start at Coal Creek. The locomotive is going to pick up 3 cars, the ash track, from the team track, and from the yard, and they're putting these 2 cars into the train. The third car here is in the yard, and it's going to be moved by the engine to the dock at Chambers Industries. And then there's a train or 2 cars at Brass and Day Hardware, and these are set into the train. So I'm going to leave town with these cars: a flat car, a combine, a reefer, an ore car, a second ore car, and a third ore car. So this is my train leaving town. I go past the sawmill. The instructions should tell me that all I'm do is passing here. There are some instructions on the switch list that tell me before proceeding beyond the sawmill, I have to get clearance from the dispatch because there may be a train coming down grade. Also, I'm required to take on water. This tells me the elapsed time, typically on the clock, that'll take 10 minutes. I go past the edge of Lake Johnston, and it's this place called Ice Station. This is where the ice house is. And this instruction tells me that I'm going to take a car, a reefer car, number 34, from the ice house track and put it in the train. Now, as that happens, this is a facing point turnout. So I'll have to pull that car and put it in the rear of the train by running around the train on the passing track at the mill. And this takes a little while, but it's pretty routine operation. So this is, I'm leaving town with these cars. I get to bunkers, and this tells me some things I need to know on here. I need to take on water, but I'm going to leave cars here. I'm going to leave 3 ore cars, and 2 of them go to Ellerby Mines, and 1 of them goes to Consolidated Mines. And those are locations in Mineral, that's Consolidated Mines. Ellerby Mines is up at the end of that switchback. Now, it turns out there's 2 cars loaded there already, 2 tracks capable of handling a total of 4 cars. So I don't have to move anything. I just put the empties on the track that's available open. On the next train coming down, they'll pick up those loads and take them down to Morton. I will take cars that are in the yard there and put them into the train, and these cars right here. So then I move on up to Tiger Mountain, and here my instructions tell me that I'm going to move a car from the store's warehouse into the yard, and then I'm going to take these cars that were in my train, and I'm going to put them in these spots. One is at stores. Here's another one at stores. In the card repair shop. This goes to Woods Transfer. This is an ash car. They will take that ashes from the ash pit and put them along the track as ballast, which was typical of what logging lines did. This reefer goes to Woods Transfer. This is going up into the woods with ice for the log camps. And then I have two stock cars that were picked up at bunkers, and those are set out of the stock pens. And the combine is left in the yard. This is a pretty basic little program that tells me what I need to do as I move along. There's some other special instructions here. I need to turn the engine, wire it, take on water, and spot it on the logs out track, and spot the caboose on the logs out track as well. So that's getting it ready for the train to come back down. I'm going to show you a walkthrough here. So here we are at Coal Creek, and this is the train I'm making up. These 3 hopper cars and other cars behind them. The train hasn't picked up the 2 cars from Brass and Day hardware, and they'll be tacked onto the front of the train here. So here's my train ready to leave town. These are a couple of cars that were picked up, and the combine goes, and then the caboose goes behind. On our way out of town, we passed Chambers Industries, which is an outfit that does logging equipment manufacture and repair. And there's 3 spots here, 2 at the main building and 1 in the yard and 1 at a loading dock right here. There's actually 4 spots. Come to the log mill. We're just passing here, but here's this passing track or runaround track. And here there's several spots for cars to spot empties or pick up loads and move them out. There's a drying area here for lumber, another track for outside storage, and then a sorting dock here where lumber is then loaded either into box cars, onto flat cars, or into gons. This mill is pretty basic in that it cuts large timbers used in the mines. So most of the material here is going to be larger dimensional material. Continue on past the mill. There's the log dump track. There's a spot here for oil that serves the boiler at the log mill. Here's the ice house on our way up past Lake Johnston. And then this is a bunkers. And so here I've got cars. My instructions will tell me that I need to pick up this reefer and these 3 stock cars. This is the switchback here that the cars have to be pushed back. Well, I'll be pulled up here onto the tail and then pushed back up to the bunkers here at Ellerby Mines. This is about 4.5–5% grade. The little shays have no trouble with even the brass cars. This is the Y at bunkers. In this case, the train will continue into town, do its switching, and then come back to the leg of the Y and go on up along the stairway. This is mineral, and here are several of those industries that I described. This is Stanley Oil. There's the consolidated mine structure here in Glenoma Hardware, and then the Hampton Supply is over here in the depot. The instructions also tell me that the combine or any passenger car that's in the mixed train is to be spotted at the depot while all the switching is going on. And here's this consolidated mines with empties here and loads here ready to go out. And then this is Ellerby Mines. I've got 2 loads all ready to go. My instructions tell me to take this car out of here, leave the others. But if I had empties, I would have spotted them here, assuming these tracks were empty. If the tracks are all full, you'll leave them in the yard down below. And then the final shot here is, well, this one on the way up, I should have shown this. This is along the stairway. It's a real 4.5% grade, which is something of a challenge, particularly if I have heavy cars in it. And then this is the top at Tiger Mountain with a Y. This is a dispatch building, workers' buildings, and the stores building is right behind here on a spur. and so on. So this is one of the shays ready to come back down with a log train already loaded. There's another locomotive here to do some switching, and as a spare, here is a car repair building and a Caterpillar repair shed as well. So it's a pretty basic little layout with nothing terribly complicated. It was designed for operation and with some idea for scenery and minimal buildings. I'm in S scale SN3, and as a consequence, the buildings tend to be much larger than N scale or HO. They consume a lot of real estate, so I have relatively less buildings on this layout than most that you'd find. So that's my little scheme. This is a very nice program. It's easy to build a train. This tells me what these cars are doing, and the ones with the parentheses around them tell me that they're in a particular train already.
Thanks, Russ.
So there you go.
Would you say that the one sheet that you print out and give to the operator is a combination of a train instruction and all of the waybills for the cars?
Yes, the switch list, yes.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I have clipboards for everybody, and this is very simple. I wanted it to be on 1 or 2 pages with minimal handling of material.
Right.
The clipboards all have Velcro on the back of them, so they can hang them up on the fascia of the layout and that sort of thing. The last thing I wanted to do was to have a handful of cards and then do 52 pickup, as I often have done when I'm operating other guys' layouts.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Our last presenter will be Todd von Stup. Todd, do you want to give us a few thoughts on your new layout and how you plan to operate it?
Sure. Right now I'm working on an N-scale multi-deck layout that takes place in, or that occupies 2 rooms. The focus is around a yard that has 2 lines that come in. So basically it's a yard that goes in 4 different directions. So it's operations and chaos is kind of what I'm going for. And basically how I'm planning it out is I want to use car cards. I was starting to handwrite them, realized it's going to be very time consuming. And so I'm going with the same formula that Bill Sorensen's going for, with color coding the towns. And on top of that, the Excel spreadsheet is like an automatic inventory for all your car cards. So the benefit I'm seeing out of doing it with the Waybills is I can have layout industries to build trains, such if I have a ballast pit on the west side that's represented in staging, I can do that as well. So let's see, I'm looking at about 500 cards. There's 12 towns. So how I'm going to do it with the box is, so it's not complicated, is each town is going to have a box, and like those micro mark boxes. So there's 3 boxes in, I guess, the container. There'll be the set out, the hold, and the pickup. And that should simplify, based on your train orders, when you get to the town, what you're supposed to be doing. If it's in the hold, you obviously aren't picking it up. If it's in the pickup, that's a car that you need to pick up. And then if it's a car that you're dropping off based on the waybills, that goes in the set out box. So if we're going to start from how someone's going to run a train, they would go over to the crew caller / dispatcher, and they'll be assigned a train number and a leave time. They'll then go to staging, and there'll be each yard track in staging with a hook. There'll be the car cards and the train ID that is the train orders. And the train orders will be printed out, much like Burrs are, that will explain, your setouts and pickups, how the train should be blocked, and things of that sort. The other reason I'm doing the car cards is so when it gets to the yard master can go through all the cards. If I was going to be using JMRI, I don't know. I think I'd be spending a lot of time on the computer. My previous experience with running at layouts is what I really like about car cards on large layouts, or complicated layouts for that matter, is they're self-healing. So if someone makes a mistake, the next operating session, someone should catch that, and the car should eventually make its way to where it needs to go. Last thing I wanted to note was I'm planning on doing a mix of both 2 and 4 cycle waybills, depending on which industries we're using. An example is I have Columbia Grain, which exports canola, and they, based on research that I've done, is they shipped it to 2 different sites. One was a processor in Great Falls, Montana, and the other one was in Warden, Washington. So it's something I can replicate with that. And with the car cards, I really enjoy the research of each industry and who's the consignee and where they're all going. So I just this is my enjoyment of research and adding all that information into the waybills.
Thanks, Todd. Anyone want to go next with thoughts on this? Larry?
basically, I don't know if any of you guys have ever operated on Tyler Whitcomb's layout or Burr's layout, but they do have kind of a similar theme to the operating session. There's cards and waybills. I think the different thing that Tyler's does is that he has the power set up for the train for somebody who's taken out a train. He has that already. His yard master is part of that job is to go and put the power on there. He basically has 2 yards, and the trains operate from one to the other with the various industries in between. He has N scale, and he puts the picture of the actual car on the car card. And I'm probably going to do that just because I like the way you can look at that picture and see exactly what you're looking for. He has been an engineer with the UP, so he has a lot of experience actually operating real trains. And he has gotten to doing all the hazmat stuff and knowing where that should be in the train and all that. I'm not going that far, but it's going to be kind of a combination of, I think, what Burr's doing and what Tyler's doing in my particular case. My railroad is an HO scale fictional line based on the Grays Harbor line for the Burlington Northern 1970 to 1995. And I have some industries there that they don't have. Like, for example, I have an intermodal yard, and I'm going to have a grain terminal. Outside of that, there's going to be lumber and paper and that stuff.
Thanks, Larry.
So it'll basically be 4-cycle waybills, I think.
Brian, Ferris, do you want to say a few words of your reaction to all this?
Lots of thoughts. I use a homegrown computer system. One of the reasons that I wanted to do that is I didn't want people to be packing cards around. Somebody mentioned the 52 card pickup. I was recently at an op session. I got my stack of cards, which was probably 20, it was a long train, 20 cars, and I ended up dropping them all on the floor. And all the guys around me helped pick them up, and I was extremely embarrassed. And so I moved on, and I ended up dropping them again. And all the guys around me helped me pick them up. And by that time, I was extremely flustered and reminded why I didn't want to use cards. But one of the drawbacks of using, and this is, I think, true with JMRI too, if you want to move a car more than once during a session, you pretty much have to go update your computer and then reprint the list out. And that's what I find to be the biggest challenge with the computer systems. As long as you're only moving the car once, you're in good shape. I've kind of cheated on that with mine in that I've got some kind of workarounds to that so we can actually move the cars more than once. But I know that I've operated on some people that use the JMRI, and if you're doing it right, when you bring a train into a yard, then you have to go reprint out the lists. So I don't know what others' experience have been with that. I mean, so there's kind of a pro and con of the cards versus the computer. The cards are very convenient for sorting and, being able to just hand off to the yard master and he can just go. But then you get guys like me that have 3 thumbs and drop them all over the floor. Right. And to make matters worse, I was up on a platform, so they went
flying off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to say something about tabs on cars?
Yeah, I don't really use that too much, but I have the option in my yard for the yard master. They can either write up a switch list based on, I have a master list, or I actually have some tabs that Wright built just out of some simple plastic, and then I added to them. They can actually take them and just put them on top of the cars, and it makes it very easy to drill. You pull a string out and you can just drill track 4, track 3, track 6, right down the line. And I did mention earlier that my brother uses tabs on his N-scale layout, which is a pretty large layout down in Texas. And he uses the color-coded tabs, and it works quite well for him. He actually has the tabs go on the top. So anyway, I've got that as an option for my yard master. Some of them use it, some of them don't. Some of them like writing out the switch lists, which, again, if you take the time to write the switch list out, it takes no time at all to drill that track then once you do that. Kind of like what Joe does. I spent more time writing the switch list out up at Joe's than it took me to to drill the cars. It was pretty fun. After you get it all organized, you just boom, 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 and you've got them all lined up, just like the real guys did.
Thanks, Brian.
I might mention the program that I have keeps track of where the cars are. It will tell me if a car that I have on my switch list is not available at the upcoming station because it's already in another train. But the way the system sets up, that car should be there by the time I get there. I don't have any issues with that. The other thing I really like is at the end of the session, the computer remembers everything. And to open another session, I just turn it on. And I don't have to pull anything and just print out the new sheet.
Unless the operator didn't deliver the car to the right place.
They always do that.
You have to operate. How many cars do you run on your layout?
Oh, well, I have like some 40 cars is all I have on the layout. But a given train will have anywhere from 6 to 8 cars typically.
Yeah. I've got about 250 that I'm managing.
Yeah.
And they end up in strange places sometimes.
Well, I've operated well on your layout, but I've also operated on Burr's, and those are big layouts.
Can I jump in on what Brian was talking about?
Yeah.
About the time. We tend to ask people in operations to do things much faster than a real world would do it. And so I know one of the things that I emphasize to the people who are going to write switch lists is they have the time to do it. That's part of the job. You have the time. If you don't do that, there's such an instinct to want to move a car right now that when Brian said there's some people who will write the switch list and some won't, I bet the people who don't, a lot of it's just like, I got to be doing something. And writing a switch list feels like I'm sitting here not doing anything while everybody else is. Having said that, I had a guy, Kirk Henderson, came at Soundrail. He works on the Montana Railway, I think. It was really interesting because he said the first thing he does when he gets his switch list from the yardmaster is he sits down in a quiet room for about a half an hour and figures out how he's going to do it. And I thought, do any of us do that, right? Do you ever see anybody sit with their instructions or their whatever for for any length of time and plan what they're going to do? I mean, I think it's just we have such an instinct to do something now that actually causes us to put more stress on ourselves than is appropriate.
Is that generated in part because everybody's running with fast clocks typically? And so they say, I can't spend 30 minutes because that's 6 hours that's gone by.
I'm with you,
right,
brother. I have no fast clocks. I agree with you. We ask people to make decisions, particularly like on timetable and train order stuff, which is, we're getting a little far afield there, much faster than a real world would do.
Right.
Joe does a great job with the time management. And I try to do that with my crews because I wholeheartedly agree. People are stressed out enough when they come to a session. We need to somehow get them to just relax and take the time that it takes to think out their moves before they do it. I think that's super important. And that's one of the reasons I run with a 1-to-1 fast clock. I do not speed it up. It just seems more relaxed when you're doing normal time. I get stressed out when I'm on a fast clock.
Hack, did you want to say something else?
Yeah, I had actually 4 points I wanted to bring up. I've only actually been operating about 8 years, although my model railroading goes way, way back. But I've been very fortunate to be able to operate both on the La Mesa Model Railroad in San Diego and David Park's Cumberland West Railroad in Los Altos, California. This is a picture of the July 2021 issue of Railway Model Craftsman when he got his layout on the cover. And one of the issues I've noticed is, first, for most of this is for David's layout, because I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, I know the geography. But most of the people he operates are Californians and don't know much about the geography. So when they get a car card, it says, pick up this load of dynamite at Pinto, West Virginia, and it's going to Morgantown or Williamsport, Pennsylvania. Well, they know, the train that picks it up only goes one place. It goes to Ridgely Yard. But the yard master has to figure out, which way do I send it? I can send it 3 ways. I can send it to Hagerstown, I can send it to Connellsville, or I can send it out someplace in West Virginia. Which one would I send it to Williamsport? And so you need to know the geography outside of your layout in some sense. And if you told me I wanted to send a car to Walla Walla, which way would I send it? I don't know that area that well, but maybe the people there would know that. So that's one thing that comes up on for some layouts. People don't have the geography understood outside of the layout. Which portal do I send it to? Another thing about David's layout is he has lots of coal trains, Western Maryland B&O, and the trains are changed in size. They come down out of the mountains with about 24 cars of coal, and then in the yard, Kaiser Yard, they are increased to maybe 36 cars of coal. And he doesn't just have people just take 12 cars and add it to it, but he in fact has 6 different types of coal on his trains. They have mine run coal, steam coal, stoker coal, and 3 types of mineral coal. And he spends a whole day, the day before, actually putting together coal orders. He has a sort of a job called a coal manager who writes up orders telling the Kaiser Yard, send out this train with these many loads of this type of coal. And he has to do that with a computer spreadsheet to know that the coal that he wants to put on that train is going to be there at the time that the next train goes out to carry that coal. So it's a good way to get people interested in classifying trains for things that you might not think you have to do any classification on. But coal is not just coal. There's lots of different types of coal. You talked about changing cars on trains, but that also happens not only for freights, but for passenger trains. And David has a rather detailed effort on having various dining cars move from one train to another, and he actually gives instructions to the William Street Yardmaster at Cumberland. When a certain train comes in, you have to take these cars off and put it on another and keep track of that. And hopefully they get put on the right train at the right time. And last thing I'll mention is the same thing happens with engines. Any of you who have operated on the Farrell Fosnite UP Wyoming division in Cornville, Arizona knows that every manifest train gets its engine train changed twice en route from Cheyenne to Ogden. He has to have people on the crew who do nothing but serve as hostlers. On the La Mesa, they have a rule that when an engine comes off a train, the roundhouse foreman has to put it into a service track for about 30 minutes to an hour. That's real time because they're running 1-to-1. And it can't even be allowed out onto another train until it's been serviced. So he has a whole board that keeps track of when trains arrive, when engines arrive, which ones are available. And then because they literally need to put helpers on some of their 65-car manifest trains to go up the hill to Mojave, they have to put helpers on, and every helper has a certain load capability, and you have to know to keep a sheet available telling you which helpers could be worked on which train. And all of those helpers are run not consistent. So if you got 2 helpers on a train with the lead engineer, you're going to have 3 engineers. And it's quite an effort sometimes to get those things up the road without having to get derailments.
Well, that's interesting. Thank you. Scott Calvert, are you interested in saying a word?
Interesting conversation. I guess one of my takeaways, which applies to a large part of the hobby for me, is that no one answer works for everybody. And so clearly we've had a good conversation about different choices. My layout, as the previous one, uses the 4-cycle Waybill system. I don't know that I would use that starting over, but I had a lot invested in this process and paperwork when I demolished the old layout and moved into the new house and built this one. Being that my layout is big, coming to the point about big layouts, I chose to use the system I had and add on to it. The other thing for me is the layout's in a 1,200 square foot room, and we're at 400 feet on a 550 foot main line. And we've moved the staging yard on the west end 4 times. So every time I make a move on the layout physically, I have to add industries, rework timetables and train orders and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not a computer tech person, as pretty much anybody will tell you. So the paperwork works well for me, but I know that the 52 card pickup can be pretty frustrating for folks as these trains get bigger and bigger. And I experienced that at the recent RMM op sessions up here last week, and I had 2 sessions, and more than a couple of times I saw the cars fly onto the floor. And I felt kind of bad for the fellows that had that experience. But at this stage, I'm not prepared to invest the time in the paperwork when I've still got a lot of layout to build. Having said that, I really enjoy the switch list stuff like Joe's done. I did a virtual session on Joe's back last year, and I've been to a couple layouts down there that use blank switch lists. And I kind of like that idea. So we actually made up blanks here and promoted their use to particularly the switching crews, right? The local turns and stuff like that, who tend to have a bunch of cards and have to play with them all the time. And surprisingly, I haven't had much of an uptake on that, even from the local guys. I kind of get that the visitors are probably reluctant to try another something that's unfamiliar to them on top of everything else they're trying to learn. To Brian's point, people are pretty stressed out as it is, and throwing another step at them is just too frustrating. But I am trying to promote that a bit more. We haven't got to the point of trying to write them ourselves and just give them to the crew. But I think that's probably in the foreseeable future for us on the 2 or 3 switching turns that we have on the layout. I think that might be a good step, kind of a transitional step from that point of view. I think a lot of you have probably seen my YouTube videos. One of them's on the operations of the layout. So for any of you that haven't seen the layout or haven't seen how I operate it, you're welcome to go and look at that 4th Division YouTube video. It was done in June last year. The car cards are another interesting thing. We've seen everything from handwritten ones to photographs on the car cards to logos. We print colored labels on the top of our logos, and the label basically is the color of the car, and the lettering on the label is in the color of the lettering on the car and the font of the lettering on the car. So it's a bit of a graphic aid. I think most of us, appreciate graphic assistance as much as possible for layouts, even ones that we kind of know. Because if you're like me, you forget that stuff if you haven't been on it for a month or so. So we do that. The challenge is if you got a 40-foot boxcar and boxcar brown on CP logo, you pretty much are looking at half the cars on the layout. So it less helpful in that case. I have 400 cars on the layout right now and about 45 locomotives. So it's a pretty big inventory of stuff to manage. But
well, thank you, Scott. Michael Boyle posted a question in the chat. Is anyone using JMRI's Operations Pro?
Seems like somebody on this call would be using
it. It does seem like that, and I think it is pretty widespread. And someone recently told me that the help function in JMRI Operations Pro has recently been rewritten, and it's quite a bit better than it used to be. So it's worth playing with.
I haven't operated on any layouts here in Puget Sound that were based on JMRI. However, when I lived back in Nebraska, there was quite a few branch line and switching layouts that use JMRI, and they worked really, really well. One that comes to mind, which was the first one that I actually used a switch list, is the first layout I ever operated on and learned how to use a switch list. How he did it is he just did one JMRI printout, and every time someone operated, he'd reset all the cards back to how it originally was. So it was just basically a 2-cycle operation.
Jack Ricketts has just started with the JMRI for his layout, and he hasn't got it up and running yet, as far as I know. He's still kind of in the learning curve, getting everything set. He's one of the ones around here that's got it going now.
Great. Did you have other comments?
Yeah, it was interesting, especially for people that haven't got this started yet. I've noticed over the years that mine have changed. And I started out with more of a car card idea. And over time, I'm working that more towards a switch list. And the car cards helped me realize that. Because I could basically play cards with my own layout and figure out where things were and where they were going, which helped me build the switch list. And as I'm now working on my outdoor layout, I'm probably going to do something similar. Probably we'll start with just narratives at first, and then move on to car cards, and then potentially move on to switch list. But that seems to be a good stepping stone to get you through that. If you're listening to this and you're not sure what to start with, you don't have to start at the ultimate solution. You can work your way into what works for you.
Could you say a little more about how you operate your indoor railroad?
So I basically had 4 cars that needed a single car order, a waybill, and then no waybill coming back because they were empty and they just needed to get back to a marshalling point. And that worked out really well for me, but I found that people, even though they're strips of paper like a car card, they wouldn't get taken down the hill or whatever. And that's what I've seen over and over is with the car cards. They just don't end up where they should, or they get dropped. And that's why I'm moving more towards the switch list. But I had to learn where my cars were going before I could get to that point.
For somebody starting out, that's kind of, I think, trying some stuff when your system is small and learning what works for you and what doesn't work for you is great. I mean, mine has evolved, and sometimes it's required a lot of rework to do it, to be honest. And you can hear people like Scott saying, I put a lot of investment in this. It's hard to go back and change. So I would encourage anybody who is starting out, get some experience, operate on different people's layout, do a little bit with yours, find out what works and what doesn't work for you. And I guess also just recognize that what works for you on day one may not be what you want as you learn more and get more sophisticated or less sophisticated or whatever.
I think a couple of things not been mentioned. One, the issue of dispatchers. And like on Dale Kreutzer's layout, he will have dispatcher periodically hand a form to an operating crew that makes a change in what they're supposed to do during the session. So a lot of it would have to do with whether you've got a dispatcher or maybe 2 or 3 on big layouts. The other thing that's not been mentioned is the length of sessions. I found that 2 hours is about my maximum on my feet. And so it turns out most of my system easily is handled within the 2 hours, although a particular couple of crews may handle 2 different trains during that cycle. But there are a couple of trains that take almost a full 2 hours on my little layout, actually, to run from one end to the other.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the other thing I'll mention, I'm cheating a little bit. All of my locomotives are geared locomotives. So they tend to run a little slower, makes my layout a lot bigger.
Seth Newman on his layout in in Mountain View, California, also has a working hotbox detector, which will occasionally put out messages to a train that you have a hotbox, and it tells you where the axle is, and you have instructions. You have to take that car and put it out on a siding, figure out which one it is, and leave it behind.
On that theme, Joe Green inspired me to slow all my locomotives down to a maximum speed of 30 miles per hour. I found this to be tremendously helpful in terms of slowing down the operation. Believe me, a freight train with 25 cars in it going a scale 30 miles an hour is a scary thing to be in control of, even at 30 miles an hour, because it's rolling down the track and you're thinking, wait, what's supposed to happen to this train next? And so I've really appreciated that. I know it's something that Joe did. I just put in the chat the web address for the OPSIG, which is opsig.org, and it's an incredibly useful resource for discussions about all these types of operational issues. They have a nice book called A Compendium of Model Railroad Operations, and I just didn't think this meeting could be complete without at least mentioning that if you're not familiar with that resource. One of the things that's really fun about operating sessions, especially if you have yard masters or anything like that, you can end up with large groups of operators all putting their heads together, trying to figure out what do they think is the best way to do a certain move. And everyone learns a lot from each other's opinions. So it can turn into a group grope about what's the best way to switch a particular car out of a train. Given a certain number of constraints, how long the lead track is, or I can think of a number of the layouts of the people on this room that I've really witnessed a lot of fun collaboration. Well, anybody else? I think it's probably time we call it a night, but it's clearly a good topic that we're all addicted to discussing. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
See you guys later.
Yep.
Good night.